Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. There are many, many amazing sports heroes over the last 100 years. Now, let's take them and look at their background. And there's a substantial number of them that were in combat, especially in World War II, something that a lot of us don't realize. We're going to talk with the author of a book today that he's done deep research into this. He's given much insight, and a lot of these are names that you know, but a lot of times we don't connect them with their service to our country. And before we begin, let's introduce the publisher of this fantastic book from NFB Publishing. Mark Pogozinski joins us again on the program. How are you doing today?
Good, Steve. How are you?
Fantastic. Great to have you here. You brought company. Who do we have with us?
So we have Mr. Christopher Warner, who is the author of Playing for Keeps, which is a collection of stories of athletes who fought in World War II and who went on to have fantastic careers in their given sports. And it's an incredibly well-researched and articulate book that really brings these people who are mostly our household names, but it brings them alive. And you get a new perspective on what they went through and when they came back after the war, what they did in terms of athletics.
Christopher, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
This is really unique. And usually I don't start with this question, but I have to this time. Interesting book connection between the athletes, combat. Where did this begin for you? What was your inspiration to write a book like this?
You know, I've always been interested in sports and military history, two genres which I've written about extensively over the years. And so combining them just kind of made sense to me. You know, most people, even the most casual sports fan, has heard of Yogi Berra, Bob Feller, Chuck Bednarik, Barney Ross. But what's far less known is the fact that they also took part in some of the biggest battles in history, from D-Day to Guadalcanal. So it made perfect sense to me. But the juxtaposition of sports and military history is actually part of our American culture, really. I mean, if you think about metaphors like, you know, in the trenches, in the heat of the battle, you know, and so on. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it because for me, I mean, this is kind of my wheelhouse. So I was able to combine the two.
Amazing. In to Win is another one. When you think of combat, when you think of sports, out of the legendary athletes in your book, which one stands out for you? Is there one that really kind of took you once you started digging into the history?
All right, now you're putting a gun to my head, Steve. Okay, so
it's like your children. Pick your favorite kid. Yeah, I can't do that.
You know, so there's 16 profiled in the book, and it's tough because you spend so much time writing about them and digging into research. And for me, it was just, you know, stacks of biographies, autobiographies, National Archives, their military records, and in some cases, speaking with direct family members. So you get very close, right? But there are some that, you know, just really are so incredible that it was almost as if I had to tamp it down a little bit. Otherwise, it was just going to sound too comic book superhero. But at the same time, though, these stories really happened. There's definitely a cinematic theme that runs through a lot of them. And I'll give you a few examples. Imlin Tunnell, who was a legendary defensive back, played for most of his career with the New York Giants and then the Green Bay Packers. And he served in the Coast Guard during World War II and was on a cargo ship that was hit by a Japanese torpedo. So during the chaos and the smoke and the fire, he sees one of his fellow sailors coming at him, fully engulfed in flames. And just instinctively, he tackled him and put out the flames with his bare hands. All right. And, you know, it was his friend. He didn't think twice about it. And that's just the kind of person he was. But it wasn't the first time that he would do something extraordinary and save another life. A few years later, he was on a different ship off the coast of Newfoundland, and another sailor fell into icy water and was drowning. Tennell jumped into the water, and mind you, Imla Tennell was from Philly. All right, he could barely swim. Jumped in the water, brought him to the shore, and and then goes on to have this Hall of Fame career. He was the first African American elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I would say someone like Barney Ross. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because that was the name that Sylvester Stallone chose for the main character in The Expendables, right? And so he wanted a badass, right, who saves the world. And so Barney Ross, right, became the lead character. But Ronnie Ross was a real person and a championship boxer, three-time champion boxer. Grew up in Chicago. Al Capone, Prohibition era Chicago. So, you kind of had to be tough, and he was. So he goes off, fights in the South Pacific, and literally crawls out of the hell of Guadalcanal and earns the Silver Star for saving several of his fellow soldiers, killing over 20 enemy, and meanwhile is suffering from malaria, but gets through it somehow. So these are just a few stories that I hope people enjoy because they're all incredible, really, in their own right.
I can't even imagine, Christopher, going through the research, and there's so much of it. The stories go on. Did you have a formula in your mind for what you wanted to put in the book? Like when you went in, it's almost like you're a CSI investigator going in, finding out the different pieces of the puzzle. Oh, I've got a little here. I'm going to take one over here. I'm going to take this piece over here to formulate the image and the vibe of your book. How did you do that? There's so much information you had to go through and really decide what to use.
Yeah, and it was tricky. I mean, the main criteria was twofold, and that is they had to have been at the very top of their game in their respective sports, whether it be football, baseball, basketball, track and field, boxing. And then they also had to have seen significant combat. I mean, 16 million Americans served in World War II, but only a small fraction actually saw combat. So essentially that, what was the main framework. But then at the same time, though, there was a lot of information to sift through because, it's easy to get blinded by the glow of some of these larger than life superstars. And in one landmark case, Warren Spahn, right? Legendary left-hander, the most winning left-hander in Major League Baseball history. So, he comes out of the Army and immediately starts, just winning 20 games every year and Cy Young Awards, en route to his Hall of Fame career. So along the way, people, a lot of books are written about him. And some sports writers tended to just kind of embroider his war record and just say, oh, yeah, he ran into a machine gun nest and, singly won the war and he's Warren Spahn. Of course he did. Well, no, he didn't. And in a landmark case, Spahn sued one of the publishers for false praise. Now you think about that, right? I mean, most people would take whatever publicity they can. Not Warren Spahn. He was a stand-up guy. And he's like, no, I'm not a hero. All right. Now he actually did. He was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Vermeulen. And he did earn a battlefield commission, which is certainly, commendable. But, he didn't win a Bronze Star. He didn't win a Silver Star. All of that was made up. And it was important to him that he set the record straight.
Mm. Wow. Imagine putting your head on the pillow every night and thinking people are thinking these things of you based on what was out there. What's your affinity with combat, World War II? Where does that come from?
Sure. I'm going to scoot out of the way. And if you look up, that's my great uncle. And he flew combat gliders in World War II. And if you know anything about that segment of the war, combat gliders essentially were suicide missions, right? They were towed into battle and dropped either troops or supplies. And every landing was a crash landing, basically. right? Because you're talking about, no engine, no parachutes. So he managed to survive, and he didn't talk a lot about it, but my grandfather did, his brother. So I grew up hearing those stories, and that certainly piqued my interest. And I've
Mm.
always just been fascinated about stories. And coincidentally, my great uncle, Tom Warner, had been a really good athlete, had been a state champion high hurdler. And those legs, no doubt, came in very useful when he was actually
Wow.
in the thick of it.
Amazing. Random question. Who is Sergeant Rock?
Sergeant,
Rock.
I give up.
When I was growing up, that was a comic book character, and that got me
Okay.
into, reading about combat and being interested in that. And I would,
Okay.
read those stories in the comic book and then, start watching movies. And then that, eventually led to Saving Private Ryan and all those big type of combat movies. Fascinating connection here. Mark, when you got the concept for this book, what were you thinking?
Um, the stories themselves are standalone, but I thought like the theme of the book, the idea of sacrifice, putting aside careers, to fight for your country, to fight for a cause, and that these men who were to go on to become fantastic, world famous athletes were in, to use the term, the trenches. They saw combat, they saw horrible things, and they were able to come out of it and continue on with their lives. Many of them become incredibly successful. And I think it's a little bit lost on the younger generation, the notion of putting aside what you want for the greater good. And so I like the theme of it, and that runs through the entire book. And he talks about all the different athletes, but there were some that I didn't know. There was the bobsledder, Billy, is it Frisk?
Billy Fiske.
Fisk. When I saw the picture of him, that guy is a matinee idol. Like he is like the picture is striking and his pose in it. And then he goes on to be in movies. And when I read his section, what he went through, the fact that he did not wait for the United States to declare war because he was inspired, like, I'm going to go because I understand the cause and I'm going to go fight. And to do all that and be a fantastic athlete, to put that to the side and go, you know what, I this is more important. This is more important than my career. This is more important than my health. This is something that needs to be done. And so the theme of sacrifice, and then to see the pictures that Christopher included, the one of Frisk, that one struck me the most because here was this guy who seemed to have everything. He was an athlete. He was incredibly handsome, and he that didn't matter. What mattered was fighting for the right cause.
Mm. Have you written other books, Christopher?
No, I have written a lot about sports and military history, and this book, though, has been percolating and fermenting in my brain for a long time. So it's fine. I just feel like I've given birth. I'm much lighter now.
Does it feel like, that being said, is it kind of a relief that you had the concept, you worked through the book? I mean, just amazing amounts of biographical information, historical information, all swirling in your head, on your keyboard, stacked on the desk, and all of that. Does it feel like a relief? Like, yes, I did it, and this is the way I wanted it to see, what people wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased with how it eventually came out and the fact that we were able to include as many as over 100 images. And this is really important, and I got to commend Mark for this because I just felt that you know it really helped flesh out the narrative and brought it to life. Because if you can see, and in about half of the athletes that I profiled were household names before the war. Others blossomed later, and tragically some never made it home. But the images, when you see someone like Bob Feller, all right, now just to put things in perspective, Bob Feller made his major league debut in 1936 at age 17, when most kids were in their junior year in high school. He was dominating grown men, all right, and this is arguably the golden age of baseball. Right? You're talking Joe DiMaggio, Jimmy Fox, Hank Greenberg. And so, I make the point in the book, with the possible exception of Shirley Temple, no young person in America, in Depression era America, had the same star power as Rapid Robert, as Bob Feller. And for him to be the first professional athlete to enlist after Pearl Harbor, right? And Mark had mentioned the sacrifice. Well, that was also financial. Okay. I mean, he went from being probably the highest paid, certainly probably the highest paid pitcher in the game, to go in the Navy, where he spent the next 4 years, mostly on the USS Alabama, a battleship, and saw numerous action. And so I'm pleased that when you read the book, you see the images, and it's not only photographs, it's battle maps, and in some cases, missing in action reports and
Mm.
other artifacts, some of which come from my personal collection. I'm a huge collector, and I love sports memorabilia. And and even if you don't, let's say, know a Barney Ross, well, you quickly see this guy was a pretty big deal. I mean, they had candy bars named after him, especially after Guadalcanal, because he was already a huge star, right? And just wildly popular. And then afterwards, and they actually did make a movie about his life, but one of one of the many threads to Barney Ross's story, what makes it just so incredible, is that because of his injuries and what he went through, and suffering from repeated bouts of malaria, he got addicted to morphine.
Mm.
So he comes back, and he meets with Roosevelt at the White House, and it's like, Barney Ross, you're this hero, and meanwhile, he has this dark secret, and he can't shake it. And eventually it costs him everything. But in true Barney Ross fashion, he beats it, and he becomes an outspoken advocate for drug rehabilitation. And
Wow.
so I try to include as much as I can in the book, but at the same time, though, I really wanted to focus on their combat experience, and that being just kind of the theme, the through line, so to speak.
Do you think that there could be a future book potentially from one of these athletes like Barney Ross? Could there be a movie just focusing on him and everything that he endured and how he kept bouncing back from all of that?
Absolutely. And at the same time, Netflix, if you're listening, and I know you are, I think that the book would make an amazing historical documentary series where you could combine actual footage of their athletic careers as well as clips from, again, some of the biggest battles in history. And you could supplement that with interviews of subject matter experts, as well as, live action recreating what they went through. I mean, take his story or Emily Tunnell, right? I mean, this is hero stuff that typically you only see in Marvel or DC movies.
Sure. Wow. Netflix, hello. Even if you used AI to create some of the scenes, could easily be done, as long as we're aware of that. There's also the use of personal diaries in the writing of the book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have gotten access to Billy Fiske's letters and the communication he had with his sister, and saying this is more important than anything. And yeah, I've got a great life, and I'm Billy Fiske, and I'm palling around with Errol Flynn and David Niven, and and also he had been the youngest Olympic gold medalist in history. He won the gold medal in bobsled at age 16, a record that stood for almost 6 decades. And then he defended the following Olympics at Lake Placid. And so the next time around, right, the games, like the summer games, were in Nazi Germany. And he said, fuck no. All right. I got other things to do. Oh, and sorry, I'm not sure if I can say
It's all good.
right. So I'm Billy effing Fiske. all right, I've got a lot going on. And he did. He was just that guy, and he was learning to fly and do all these incredible things. He married a countess. He was, like Mark said, he was good looking, incredibly charismatic. But when England declared war, he knew he had to be a part of it. So what did he do? And he uses his incredible athletic skills to join the RAF and flew hurricanes in the Battle of Britain.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't even know they had bobsledding as an Olympic sport around 1930. And you mentioned David Niven. Whew, flashback on that name. Like, I mean, obviously goes way back, but haven't heard that in a long time. And it just brings up, images when I was a kid seeing that name more often. Um, do you think, Christopher, that the will to win was the baseline for a lot of this? You're in combat, you have a goal. We're here to win the war, that particular battle, whatever it might be, and then translating that into sports. Why are you in there? To win.
That's a great question, and I think a really good example of that is Tom Harmon. Tom Harmon was as big a star as there was in the early 1940s. He was a 1940 Heisman Trophy winner, All-American at Michigan. He's good looking, fast, strong. Tom Harmon could have done anything. And he goes into the Air Force and is shot down twice. First time in a B-25. He was the only survivor. Then he goes to Fighter Command and flies P-38s and is involved in this just ferocious dogfight with Japanese Zeros in over Japanese occupied China, and scores 2 kills. And it's like charging these enemy planes head on, like just doing the kind of thing that, yeah, you kind of, like that Tom Harmon would do, right? Just doing Tom Harmon stuff. But he gets shot down again, and he's missing for the next 30 days. And he's suffering from dysentery, and his plane had caught on fire. So he's got burns all over his body. He's injured. He loses 50 pounds during the ordeal. He talks about later, he wrote an autobiography. He talks later about how his football legs got him through it. But I mean, and so you just have to wonder, okay, could just a normal, soldier had done that? Maybe, maybe not. And I think, to your question, that certainly was a case of him just having that incredible fortitude and determination.
Incredible. Mark, when you got this book, and I don't know what form it came to you in, the editing of this, how do you edit a book like this? Because there's so much historical information in there.
When I got it, it was pretty well far along, and Christopher had done a lot of editing beforehand. You could tell just by him talking that each of these guys could have a 400-page biography, and to narrow it down. So I thought the focus on the combat and the athletics, that was the key. There wasn't a lot of biographical information of parents and stuff like that where you could get lost. So that was kept out of it because that wasn't the focus of the particular book. And I think that's important when someone goes into a project like this. I want to tell the stories that I want to tell. These guys there's more to them, obviously. But I have to edit because my book has a focus, and the focus was on combat in World War II and their athletics. So that remained the focus, adding the pictures again to enhance it, to make sure that it flowed nicely, that it looked good, and that it was easily accessible, which I think it is. Like you can flip and like again, I'll go back to the Billy Fiske. You see his picture, you're like, never heard of this guy because I think he's one of the more obscure ones in the book. Like, who is this guy? And then there's a picture of him with David Niven, and I remember David Niven from the movies, and so I was interested in that one because of the image. The image that brought me in, and I learned, whoa, this guy, he went above and beyond. Like he didn't wait for the United States to enter. He's like, no. I'm famous. I assumed he was well off, and he's like, I gotta go fight because this is more important. So I think the focus was great, that it didn't waver.
The focus is the discipline to stay in that direction where you could have went off in personal stories deeper into that. And of course, most times I say this, Mark, when we get together, the cover. I look at that, the font playing for keeps, title of the book. Takes me back to, things I've seen like from the 1940s, that font, and even just the picture of a soldier with a helmet on firing a rifle, and that nostalgic look to it. And even the colors, they're kind of slightly muted, just spot on. Playing for keeps. Find it on Amazon or nfepublishing.com. And of course, if you're ever thinking about writing a book, it's all right there. Mark will walk you right through it. Mark, Christopher, thank you so much for being here today. Just an amazing subject for a book and perfect for a documentary or a movie. I appreciate you both being here.
Thank you for that plug, Steve. Appreciate it.
I'm going to be honest with you. If I knew that was on tonight, I would be looking forward to it and would want to see it. And I truly mean that. And I don't watch a lot of TV. This is one I absolutely want to watch. Like it's exciting, and just the connection. And also, some were athletes and then signed up for the war. Just amazing. I appreciate you both being here.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.